Well, hello, everybody. How are we all doing tonight? Tonight, we've got one called The Top 10 Evil Families, Scarier Than the Manson Family. That's pretty scary. Let's check this out.
They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when your family is a twisted web of darkness? Join us as we explore the top 10 evil families who committed crimes so chilling they'll make your skin crawl. Starting off this list, we are talking about the Lafferty brothers. Ron and Dan were not just your typical criminals. Part of a radical polygamist group that broke away from the mainstream Mormon church, these brothers turned their religious beliefs into a nightmare. In 1984, they shockingly claimed that God had told them to commit horrifying crimes. Their victims? Couple members of their own family. The brutality of the crimes involving a weapon and a very personal attack absolutely rocked the nation, especially because the brothers showed no remorse, believing that they were carrying out a divine command. This very chilling story is a stark reminder of how dangerously twisted the path of fanaticism can definitely become. Next, we are talking about the Ripper Crew, often remembered as one of Chicago's most horrifying gangs in the early 1980s. This was not just an average group of criminals. They were led by the disturbingly charismatic Robin Gecht. This quartet of men transformed their twisted fantasies into a very gruesome reality. Their crimes weren't just shocking for the sheer brutality of them, they involved some horrific details that ended in the deaths of at least 18 women. But of course, it didn't stop there. The Ripper Crew elevated their wickedness to another level with human consumption and very bizarre ritualistic practices, including amputations performed to satisfy Gecht's grotesque obsessions. Their rituals, believed to involve eating parts of their victims as a way to gain power, still send shivers down the spine of those who remember the case. Just horrific. There's really no other word for it other than just absolutely horrific. Next up, we are talking about the Papin sisters. The Papin sisters, Christine and Leah, were the centerpiece of one of France's most chilling cases. Back in 1933, these two seemingly quiet live-in maids snapped in a spectacularly horrific way. They brutally took the life of their employer's wife and daughter in France. The details were gruesome. The victims' eyes were gouged out, and the attacks were so violent that even the police couldn't believe what they were seeing. This wasn't just a simple crime of rage. The sisters worked in tandem, methodically carrying out the crimes in a way that left the nation reeling. What makes the sisters' story so captivating is how it peeled back the veneer of domestic tranquility to expose a deep, dark vein of class tension and psychological turmoil. These sisters weren't just maids, they were symbols of the oppressed working class, pushed to the brink by their subservient roles and eventually breaking in the most dramatic way possible. I'm definitely not victim blaming at all. It just is definitely one of those cases where there's just a lot going on. The backstory is pretty wild. Their trial was of course a media sensation, stirring up debates about mental health, workers' rights, and the hidden despair lurking in ordinary lives. In the end, the sisters' saga is a macabre tale of what happens when the human mind is pushed too far, wrapped in a mystery that still fascinates and horrifies people to this day. And I'm sure for as long as we remember the story, it will always be absolutely horrifying. Next, we are talking about the Briley brothers, Linwood, James, and Anthony, who all turned 1979 Richmond, Virginia into their personal hunting ground in a chilling spree that lasted over 7 months. These brothers weren't picky. They engaged in random acts of violence, home invasions, and cold-blooded crimes, racking up at least 11 victims. Their reign of terror included not just killing, but also tormenting their victims and stealing anything that they could get their hands on. Just imagine the fear that gripped Richmond as these brothers moved from one crime to the next, seemingly always one step ahead of the law. The manhunt to catch them was one of Virginia's most intense and nerve-wracking, with the whole community holding its breath until they were thankfully finally brought to justice. Next, we're talking about the Bloody Benders, who
did.
were like the horror movie family you hope to never meet. Operating in Kansas during the 1870s, they ran a seemingly innocent inn and general store, but with a very grisly twist. The family, led by the very mysterious John Bender and his equally mysterious kin, had a very chilling side hustle, killing their guests for cash. Travelers would check in and, well, they wouldn't really check out. The Benders cleverly positioned their victims at a seat of honor at their dinner table, which was unfortunately placed over a trap door. I'm not laughing, that's just crazy that that's real. I feel like that's only in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but
or Motel Hell.
After a hearty meal, the guests would be whacked on the head and then dropped into the cellar to meet a very grim fate. This went on until the neighborhood started noticing that people who visited the Benders tended to disappear into thin air. Honest to God, thank you for the nosy neighbor in that situation. Alright, sometimes a nosy neighbor can be annoying, but I guess when the Benders are in town, we need them. When the suspicions grew too intense, the Benders did what any family of criminal masterminds would do. They vanished. By the time the locals pieced everything together and dug up the property, the Benders were long gone, leaving behind a legacy that turned their homestead into an infamous chapter of Wild West lore. Yeah,
so in this lifetime they got away with it. No
justice in that story. Next we are talking about Behram and the Thuggee cult. The story of Behram and the cult are like something straight out of a horror classic, but this nightmare was very real in 19th century India. Behram, who was the cult's most infamous leader, is often called one of history's worst killers. So basically, the whole thing was a secretive gang called the Thuggees, and they roamed the Indian countryside with a very chilling mission. Their MO was to befriend travelers, take their lives with a ceremonial scarf called a rumal, and then rob them blind. They did this all under the guise of worshipping the goddess Kali, believing their crimes were a form of devotion. The leader himself is said to have been directly involved in taking the lives of over 900 people. The British eventually cracked down on this crime group, but the sheer scale of their crimes and the cold-bloodedness of the leaders like Behram still boggle the mind even today.
Really? Yeah.
Next we're talking about the Carrington family, also sometimes known as the Fall River cult. In the late 1970s, the quiet town of Fall River, Massachusetts became the backdrop for a horrifying series of events. Carl Drew and Robin Murphy, two seemingly ordinary individuals, actually led a satanic cult that included members of the Carrington family. This dark and twisted group was involved in the brutal, ritualistic killings of 3 women, shocking everyone with the level of violence and the satanic practices involved. The crimes were not just gruesome, they were carried out with a ceremonial cruelty that suggested that they were more than mere killings. They were actually rituals meant to honor some nefarious unseen force. As the cult continued their sinister activities, the local community lived in fear, and the mysterious aura surrounding the Carrington family grew. Details emerged of rituals, sacrifices, and an unsettling belief in dark powers, painting a picture of a family caught in the grip of something truly evil. This saga of brutality, mysticism, and mayhem left an indelible mark on Fall River, turning the Carrington family into a name synonymous with one of the most disturbing chapters in the town's history. Next we are talking about
evil. That's
the
more
Cray
than mental
twins,
illness.
Ronnie and Reggie, and they were not just gangsters, they were celebrities of the criminal underworld in the East End of London during the swinging 50s and 60s. These twins ran their gang called The Firm, with a mix of brutal violence and a surprising dash of charm, pulling off armed robberies, running protection rackets, and setting the occasional building on fire when needed. But the Crays weren't just about the tough stuff. They rubbed elbows with politicians and pop stars, making them the feared yet fascinating faces of London's mob scene. Their story is an absolute wild ride, complete with evil crimes, glamorous parties, and a dramatic downfall that turned them into legends. Everyone knew that crossing the Crays was a one-way ticket to trouble, but it is said that their charisma made them oddly magnetic figures in London's tumultuous underbelly. Next we are talking about the bourgeois bourgeois family. This family is like the original Game of Thrones cast, full of plots, poison, and power grabs. During the Renaissance, they were like the Kardashians of their day, but way more dangerous. Rodrigo Bourgeois, who wormed his way into becoming Pope Alexander VI, was the family's superstar. Under his rule, the Vatican was less about piety and more about power plays and partying. His son Caesar was the real-life version of Machiavelli's prince, ruthless, cunning, and a master manipulator who inspired fear and respect. And then there's Lucretia, often painted as the femme fatale of the family, wrapped up in rumors of poison rings and scandalous affairs, but also a savvy political figure in her own right. Together, they turned the church and European politics into their personal chess game, leaving a trail of intrigue, mysterious deaths, and whispered secrets that make them one of history's most notorious and fascinating families. And finally, to close out our list today, we are talking about the Sawney Bean family. You would think that a family called the Beans would be like cute and nice and wholesome, like we're the Beans.
Mr. Bean.
But no, of course not. It simply just has to be the stuff of nightmares. The chilling saga of the Sawney Bean family is a tale that definitely straddles the murky line between Scottish folklore and nightmarish reality. So let's take it back to the 16th century on the rugged Scottish coastlines, where a secretive clan led by the infamous Sawney Bean resides. According to legend, this family wasn't your typical band of misfits, they were human eaters. Hiding out in a secluded coastal cave, the Bean clan supposedly ambushed unsuspecting travelers at night, dragging them back to their grim abode to meet a gruesome end. The stories claim that they took the lives of and feasted on over 1,000 people.
I can't
thriving in
imagine
secrecy for
eating a
decades.
human being.
Historians, however, are a little skeptical. I'm not here to lie to you. They poke holes in the tale, questioning its authenticity and suggesting it might be more about sensationalism than
Well,
historical
I'm sure it went
fact.
on.
But whether myth or fact, the story of the Bean family has fascinated and horrified people for generations, making it a perfect blend of horror and historical mystery. So, was Sawney Bean a real figure of terror, or just a boogeyman born from the depths of folklore? The answer might depend on how dark you like your history served. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking.
Well, that was interesting. That one that they mentioned, two brothers, the twins, the Crays, there's actually a movie about them starring Tom Hardy. And he plays both brothers in that movie. I haven't seen it. I can't remember the name of it. It might just be called The Crays. I can't remember. K-R-A-Y-S. But yeah, there's a lot of weird, evil people in this world. I don't know. Let me know what you thought of that in the comments down below. Now, it's time for a joke. Did you hear about the group of dyslexic devil worshippers? They sold their soul to Santa.